Well, my guest today is Ron Magill, who, for the past 46 years, has been the heart, the voice, and ambassador to one of America's great zoos, Zoo Miami. Hey, welcome, Ron, and it's good to see you again. How have you been?
I've been great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I invited you to the show today because you're the only person I know who built a new kind of animal habitat where the animals live in environments that they're comfortable with, and we have to stand around and watch. It's so much better than looking at them in cages.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that when we opened back in 1980, 1981 was the official grand opening. It was billed as the first kind of cageless zoo. We didn't have the standard bars, the concrete floors. We had animals that are out on open islands surrounded by moats, live trees, live grass. It wasn't that stereotypical, very sterile type of cage that animals were in zoos from 40, 50 years ago. So that helps send a trend.
Well, you grew up in New York.
I did, yes.
I'm a New Yorker, and in New York there was the Bronx Zoo, which I thought, oh, this is spectacular,
Yeah.
and the little zoo in Central Park. How does a kid from Queens get involved with animals?
Stewart, I grew up in a small apartment. I'm the son of immigrant parents. My father was born in Cuba. My mother was born in New York, but her mother was from Germany. Her father's from Colombia. We had one little black and white television set in our apartment. And every Sunday night, 7:30, right before the Wonderful World of Disney, I watched a show called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom
Yeah, I know it.
with Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler. And that introduced me to wildlife. I looked at those animals on that show in places like Africa and Asia and the Amazon, and I was so wowed by them. Now, another thing that few people know about me is that when I was a kid, my first language was Spanish. And the school I went to in New York had no Spanish speakers, very, very Anglo. And I was bullied. I was bullied really badly. They called me all kinds of ethnic slurs. I was also very tall and very gangly. They called me Lurch. They called me Frankenstein. I really kind of retreated into myself because I was bullied so badly. But after school, and this is a real true story, after school, I would take my lunch and I had peanuts. And there was a squirrel that would come up to me, Stewart, and eat out of my hand. And I remember that squirrel would sit next to me and eat. And I said to myself, this squirrel wasn't judging me. He was sitting next to me. He was eating the peanuts. And every day after school, I would feed this squirrel. And it was like I had a friend. I had something that wasn't. And then it migrated to the pigeons. I could have seeds in my hand, and the pigeons would literally land on my hand and eat the seeds. And I this bond that was created where I said, here's something that likes me, that's not calling me names, and that trusts me. And that created a bond that really has just, grown into this passion that I have for wildlife that was then accelerated by my trips to the Bronx Zoo. When I went to the Bronx Zoo, listen, Stuart, I want to say something that most people are going to think is kind of surprising coming from me. In a perfect world, we would never need any zoos. I would never support taking an animal out of the wild and putting it in captivity, unless it's a last-ditch effort to save that individual animal's life or to save the species that it represents.
If you don't bring animals out of the wild so that people who would never come in contact with
Right.
them, how are they going to learn anything, and how are they going to learn to respect them and appreciate them? That can only be done on a one-on-one visit, even if you don't talk to them.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but here's the difference. Today, we have enough animals that have been born in captivity for generations that there's no need to take animals out of the wild anymore. Zoos have to be able to manage populations under human care to keep them healthy without needing to take animals out of the wild. We can immobilize an animal in the wild, we can collect its sperm in the wild and artificially inseminate animals under human care and inject that new bloodline without taking them out of the wild. Now, having said that, there are species, the California condor, the Arabian oryx, the black-footed ferret, the golden lion tamarin. These are species that would be extinct in the wild today were it not for zoos breeding them in captivity and releasing them back into the wild. Zoos provide critical windows into the wild that most people will never have otherwise. I've been very lucky. I've been able to set foot on every continent on this planet. I would never have dreamed I would have been able to do that as a young boy, but I have been able to do that. But I also realized the overwhelming majority of people will never do that. So they need to be able to see those animals through those windows provided by zoos so that it plants a seed in them like it did in me. that grew into this passion that I have for wildlife to get them to care. There's an old saying, Stewart, that I live by. It says, in the end, we protect what we love what we understand, and we understand what we're taught. Zoos' critical mission is to teach people to understand animals, to learn to love them, and want to protect them.
You started your journey with animals by going to college, and you went for 3 years, and then you dropped out.
Yes.
Why?
I dropped out because I applied for a job as a zookeeper here at the Crandon Park Zoo, the beginning zoo here in Miami. And I was offered the job, but they told me if I wanted the job, I had to go do it right then, which means I had to leave in my senior year at the University of Florida. And I realized that that's a job that's very rare. So I made the very difficult decision to leave college in my senior year to get at least my foot in the door to hopefully introduce me to this profession that I've learned to love.
I'm sure your family was thrilled at that decision.
My father was so profoundly disappointed that it hurt me because I was the first kid in my family to go to college. And I'll never forget, my father was Cuban. He had only gone up to the 4th or 5th grade, and he was so disappointed. He said to me, "You're going to leave the University of Florida in your senior year to go shovel poop?" And I said, "Pop, it's more than that." And, to his credit, he supported me. He says, "I just want you to do what you like to do. But, I always want what's the best for you." Parents always want their kids to do better than they did.
And then you're working for the zoo, and along comes Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
How did you handle that? And what happened to the animals?
Well, Stewart, that was a big wake-up call because I really didn't have a lot of respect for hurricanes, because prior to Hurricane Andrew, we'd had a couple of mild hurricanes, Hurricane David, or another one. It's just a lot of rain and wind. And I'm saying to myself as a young man, this is a bunch of garbage. These people are making a big mountain out of a molehill. These storms are not that bad. And I remember an older person telling me when Hurricane Andrew was coming, because we had to do these preparations where we had to, secure all the animals, secure everything. We did all these preparations, and I got so tired of doing them for something that wasn't that necessary. The storms weren't that bad. I said, we did all that work for nothing. And when Hurricane Andrew was coming, I said, well, it better come this time, and it better be big, because I'm tired of doing all this work for nothing. And the elderly person said, be careful what you wish for. And boy, was he right.
So what happened to the animals? Where did they go during the hurricane? Because the zoo wasn't what it is today.
No, a lot of those animals we secured in larger buildings. One of the famous things that we did was we captured all the flamingos out in the flamingo.
Yeah, I remember that picture.
And we put them in the bathroom, the public men's restroom here at the zoo. And I remember taking that photograph, not thinking anything about it other than this is a weird thing to see all these flamingos in the men's room here. And then after the storm, the Associated Press in New York called me up and said, listen, do you have any pictures of something other than, roofs off of houses and boats up on streets? I said, I got a picture of the flamingos in a bathroom that literally saved their lives. I sent it to the AP, it went over the wire, and it became one of the most iconic photographs representing Hurricane Andrew.
Well, I know you have a background in photography, but how did you segue into doing documentaries and winning 5 Emmys?
Yeah, well, Stuart, I'm very lucky. Actually, it's 6 Emmys, and I'm very lucky because I was
sorry.
No worries. I got to work with great storytellers. The South Florida media, if you look at the wall behind me here, you see all those photographs. Those are all journalists, generally speaking, that took me under their wing, and they taught me how to be a storyteller. I realized to be effective in conservation, to be effective to get people to care about animals, you got to be a good storyteller. And that's how I started to realize photography, videography, telling stories through images was the most impactful way that I could make a difference.
Well, you've had a really amazing career. When did you realize that you were a success, and how did it make you feel?
I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't realize that I was a success until I announced my retirement. I announced my retirement on social media just to inform my friends, that I was planning to move on to a different thing. And all of a sudden, my phone started blowing up. All the news stations started calling my house. People were here at the zoo with live trucks wanting to interview me. And I said, what are you guys here for? I thought something tragic had happened. They go, we're here for you. You're retiring. This is big news. I didn't have any concept that the community embraced me the way they did. When I was reading hundreds, if not thousands of comments on these social media platforms, I looked at my wife and I said, did I die? It was incredibly inspiring and humbling, to be honest with you.
Looking back over your 46 years, what's the one achievement or moment that you're the most proud of?
Like I said before, I didn't come to work here to work for an attraction. I came to work here to make a difference for conservation, for protecting animals in the wild. At the end of the day, Stewart, if the zoo is the last place that these animals can safely survive, the zoo's a fail, and which should be their #1 priority, to protect animals in the wild. And in that vein, I established a conservation endowment here at the zoo several years ago that now has grown to several $1,000,000, that every year I'm able to give away tens of thousands of dollars to researchers and conservationists and scholarships for people trying to protect animals in the wild.
And one last question. What's in the future for Ron Magill?
Well, retiring from the county after 46 years is a bit refreshing. I don't have to deal as much with the bureaucracy that's commonly attributed to government work. I'm working now for the Zoo Miami Foundation. They created a wonderful position for them as their Zoo Goodwill Ambassador. And I'm going to be speaking at schools. I'm going to be working on building up that endowment to keep providing, scholarships and money and funding to help protect animals in the wild. And I'm going to be leading the travel program for the zoo, where I'm curating these incredible trips where I'll be leading our donors and supporters around the world.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you.